All right, everybody, I want to welcome you to the encore presentation of the Path of Kof, the 29th path, which takes us through from Malchut to Netzach via the Pillar of Mercy, and is represented in tarot by the path of by the tarot card of the Moon, and is in astrology assigned to the energy of Pisces. Now, to begin with, I just want to say if people are approaching this and this is the first one that they're listening to, I don't think anyone here has not been to one before. But if you decide to download and listen to them, and this is the first one you happen to listen to, that's fine. You can go through these in any order for now. I'd prefer for you to explore the paths as they come up, but if you want to start listening to this one, that's fine. Now, there have been a number of questions that I've received. The person who actually asked the questions is not here at the moment, so I'm going to wait on those. I'm going to go over a couple of things that people had asked in the previous time, even though you may have heard the recording of that. I'm going to just go over it. But in the meantime, I want to have people begin to discuss their experiences of the path of Rash and how that impacted you. And we'll discuss that for the first little bit, and then we'll move to the path of Kof. Now, I know that some of you are having pretty strong reactions to these recordings and to things, so feel free to share your experiences in any way that you'd like to, or you can keep them to yourselves. But anyway, the questions that I was asked before were if there's a problem with listening to ones that you listened to in the past and not doing them in order. In other words, should you listen to them the 32nd, the 31st, the 30th, the 29th, the 28th, and never go back until you've done a whole time through, or never, or if you want to go back, start at the beginning and work your way all the way through again? And the answer to that is that it's fine to listen to one of these out of sequence with the others. If you feel like you need a little extra work with the 31st path or something like that, you don't need to listen to the 32nd path before you listen to the 31st path again. Now, I wouldn't recommend jumping, to the 11th path and then working backwards from there. That's probably not going to be very productive. But once you've gone through it, you can feel free to go back to it and work with it again when it's convenient for you to do so, or when you feel like you need it. And in fact, you can use that as a sort of a magical preparation. If you're going to do something that relates to one of those energies, it might be useful to do the path working. And a related question to that is that people have asked me, should you, working with the archangel recordings or the other, angelic recordings that relates to the Sephirotic and planetary and elemental energies that are related to these same the same energies that are in the paths, should you do the angel first and then the path, or the path first and then the angel? And again, I don't think that there's necessarily a correct approach to that. I think that they're different from one another in some ways, in that the path working specifically focuses on bringing you through an experience into the next kind of level, or the next Sephira. The angelic recordings bring you into specific connection with one of those energies for the purpose of making a transformational experience within the energies of the planets and elements themselves. And so, in a way, they're kind of like just working with the Sephira instead of working with the paths. So, you can approach them in either direction. You could, for instance, we're heading towards Netzach now, so you could work with the Venusian angels and the Venusian energies to connect yourself with that more, or you could wait until after the path working and then work with the Venusian angels, which is Haniel. So you can take either approach to it that you want to. there's definitely some usefulness to either approach and to mixing and matching and approaching things different ways. If you feel like like for instance, Netzach is that Venusian love, bliss. If that's an energy that you don't feel particularly connected with, it might be useful to approach the archangel before you do the work, do the path working. That way you're kind of connected with that energy a little bit more. And like when you get to the point in the path working in which the outline of the angel is appearing in the sky, it'll be an old friend who's welcoming you forward into the energy. On the other hand, it's not necessary. And in fact, the friend that initiates you into the the green area can be someone who you work with later separately. Brendine, they're unrelated. They aren't related to the path workings, but if you look on my site, there's a thing called angelic invocations. Brendine's asking if she's missing something. Are there recordings for the angels? And so someone had just asked me if they wanted to work with those recordings, if they should wait until they've done the path working before they do them, or if they should do them, before, or which direction. And I'm basically just saying either direction. So does anyone have any experiences on the path of Rash that they'd like to share before we move to the path of Kof? Because I want people to feel free to express what's going on and what they're experiencing. Juan is saying something here. During the path working of Rash, I found myself in a home, vibrant in earth tone colors and warmed by a fireplace. In the center were the two statues, one of a lion and one of a hydra. During the meditation, both came to life. The overall tone and message was that of removing wasteful energy and applying more focus on inner work. A very powerful meditation at the end. The Archangel Gabriel appeared as well. Well, that's fantastic. The one thing I wanted to mention too about someone had asked me about the sort of crystalline statues of the four cherubic elemental beasts, the lion, the man, the bull, and the eagle, that appear during the Malkut meditation that don't, or the Malkut to Tao to Yesod meditation, but don't occur in any of the other ones. And that's the first recording. They're inherent within that first recording, but they can be there later. They aren't explicitly discussed, but if you want to, you can visualize them as being a part of the inner temple when you're in Malkut. That's up to you. So Brendine is saying that she also feels the shift to inner work focus after doing the Rash meditation. Well, it's terrific. I mean, the point of the Rash meditation is to allow you to see some of the fears and doubts that kind of cloud your perception of your inner essence, and to clear some of those away. So I know that there have been a few people who have had some experiences along those lines in the last week outside of the meditation as well. So I'm sure that that's somewhat related. But so if there's no questions about your experiences of the path of Rash, let's move to the Qoph. Brendine says that she saw the angel Sandalphon standing in front of her, in the air over her, and felt a purification. Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I want you guys to be opening up to the angelic realms and regularly having those sorts of experiences as a result of these things. But the lack of an overt experience in that way doesn't mean that it's not happening in a subtle way as well. Oh, that was Kevin saying that. Okay, hi Kevin. So should I take it that Brendine is Brendine and Brendine / Kevin is Kevin? Is that the way I should interpret that? I get it now. So let's move to the Path of Kof, which is the next path. And this path really specifically deals with some very important and fundamental things to the spiritual path. This is a pretty can be an intense and powerful path. They all can be, but this one is particularly interesting because it specifically focuses on the projections that you are putting out into the world that affect your perception of things and your the tendency to judge or to feel less than or to feel scared or feel uncomfortable or feel like you're not good enough. All of these things are based on imaginary constructs that we have created, and they take on a real life. They take on a reality for us. We project them outward onto others and force those others to play those roles for us. And this path is specifically about letting go of those as much as possible so that you can have a more genuine experience of life in which you just simply experience bliss. So the specifics of the path take us through an imaginal terrain that's based largely on the tarot card, and this is actually one of the ones that more closely resembles the tarot card in some ways. So I'm going to show you guys the image of this card. This is probably the most famous one. My computer's in a slightly different place, so I'm getting shadow put on me. This is the moon, and it depicts, in the very foreground, there's a river or a lake of some sort, most likely, although it could be the sea as well, with a crayfish or a lobster or something coming out of it, or a crab, and then a path leading off into the distance that winds and twists. And before you can go on that path, you have to pass by two dog-like creatures, one of whom seems to be a dog, and the other one perhaps a coyote or a wolf, or even a jackal. And then beyond that, you need to pass through two towers. Here's the moon up above with little yuds, I can see them, little Hebrew letter yuds all raining down. And what this path represents is a move into the imaginal realm in a way that connects us with our value structures, our hierarchies, and our projections. In the New Hermetics, if you look at this path in the New Hermetics tree, it actually says all path working is this path in a way, because all path working is about connecting with symbols and discovering their archetypal meaning and discovering the projections that we have on them. Like, for instance, the devil. For some people, the devil is someone who they think is cool because they want to be rebels, and so the devil is something appealing. For some people, the devil is something terrorizing. The devil is just a thought construct, and even in the most rigorous religions, the devil works for God, and so isn't really anything to be feared. If you're a godly person, you're on the same team, really. The devil's work is to work for God to try and pull people off the path. Or if you have a different way of looking at it, the devil is the rebellious spirit that tries to help you escape from the restrictions of the false god that wants to keep us imprisoned in matter. That's another way that people look at the devil. But those projections, those ideas, they're all just constructs within our own minds. There's no reality to most of what I just said. It's just simply a bunch of ideas that are presented into your brain and affect you. There's no real difference between the devil and Jesus from the perspective of pure oneness. From the enlightened perspective of God, the enlightened perspective of the monad, of the Ein Sof, of Keter, there's only that one essence. There's only one thing. And so all of the things that we fear and doubt and are concerned about are projections, ultimately, that keep us from God. Now, this path deals with this matter at the level that's closer to the personality level. There's higher and deeper ways of connecting with this oneness, with this deep, abiding inner essence of each of us that is connected directly with the divinity. This deals with it more on the personality level, the things that we interact with that negatively affect us, or that positively affect us. Some people think that they are more godly than another person, or smarter than another person, or more wealthy than another person, and that puts them in their mind, that puts them at a higher level than somebody else. I make $1 million a year, so I'm better than that person who makes $20,000 a year. I never swear, so I'm more righteous than that person over there who just said the F word. These sorts of things are also projections at the personality level that cause a disconnect between us and the world around us. Now, a couple of people have said hello from somewhere else. Zoltan from France says, "Hey everyone, 93. Juan says, "With Qoph, I found myself being guided along a forest by the moon instead of the stars towards a large wooden door. Once inside, I quickly realized I was in Tartarus, and it was a very dizzying experience, taking a long time to find the center of the place. The overall feeling was that of facing the darker emotional parts of my own prison. The place was filled with a great many voices and a large range of emotions. All the voice took were my own. It took some time to realize that part." That's beautiful, and in a lot of ways, that's very emblematic of the Path of Kof. It's all your voices, all the judgments that you receive from outside of yourself are really in your own voice. Because if someone says you're stupid and you don't feel stupid, then it's just a meaningless statement. But it's only when the stupid feeling exists inside yourself that the insult actually takes root and begins to hurt. So when someone says that you're spiritually corrupt or something like that, if you're not spiritually corrupt, it just seems silly when they say that. But if there's a part of you that feels like you are spiritually corrupt, then it takes root and it hurts. Juan says it was harsh at times and could feel like one could go mad within. And then he says, "Thanks." And certainly all of these paths are not without a certain amount of inherent, luckily you get to go in and out of them in a controlled way, so you can control the experience. But certainly these are things that are heavy to approach. This is in your face spiritual growth. This is not simply going on a little tour where you get to look at some pretty things and move on. If you're doing this right, you are changing as you're listening to these, and you're making growth happen inside yourself by looking honestly at the things that are going on. And it takes time because there's layers. The first time you go through this program, you're not going to necessarily see everything that's going on in it, everything that's going on in yourself, all the ways in which you're projecting. You're going to see a few of them. And then the next time you'll see a few more. And it may be that you need to run through all of these pathworking several times before you even really get to the point where you feel like you understand them at all. And Kevin says, "So do we project our thoughts into the world around us? Do we create our own worlds?" Well, obviously we're co-creating worlds together. We're playing mutual games with each other, and when we form relationships with each other, it's largely because either they're playing a game that's similar enough to ours that we can get into it, or they're playing a different game that seems appealing to us. Ooh, I'd rather be playing that game than the one I've been playing for a while, so I'm gonna sign up for this for a while. But yeah, I mean the world around us is a reflection of what we are creating for ourselves. If your world is filled with anger and discord and upset, that's something that you are creating. I mean, now, are you creating the rocks in the street? Are you creating the sky? Not entirely, although your perception of the sky you are creating. If you go outside and you look up at the sky and you say, "My gosh, it's a beautiful day. What a wonderful world to live in." That's a very different experience than going outside and going, "It's hot. I freaking hate this heat." But, those are two totally different reactions to the same day, and two different universes, ultimately. Juan says it was a great workout, and I took many great lessons from it. Again, thank you. Well, I appreciate it, Juan. Brendan says, "It feels after the meditation I'm staying out of the games and more able to stay out of projections on situations, staying in the moment much more." And that's the ideal situation. And also just to become aware of when you are, throughout your week, to just notice, oh, this relationship with this person, I'm putting him on a pedestal because he's wearing a fancy suit. That's just a projection on my part. He's just a person, just like me. We're all people here. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we're all beautiful spiritual creatures So for those of you who have done the Path of Kof already, I would suggest that you still, stick with it for a little while, because I feel like this one is actually one that's quite important. It's one that often gets ignored or just sort of run past, because the path of the moon is a path of self-deception and a path of misseeing things a lot of times, and people don't really like to think about that aspect of themselves. So this is something that's worth exploring, and it's unfortunate that we had some technical issues, but it's worth exploring for another 2 weeks. And so I'm going to, next weekend I'm not going to be able to have a webinar because it's my daughter's birthday, and happy birthday to her, by the way. And we'll resume after that. I think that the weekend after that I'm going to be able to do it. But this is one that's worth repeating a number of times and worth really working on in between the sessions, because we're getting into territory here. Up until now, most of you have probably already explored this territory in some way or another, in a therapist's office, in your own, just sort of inner explorations. But we're now emerging into territory where less people tread. We're moving into the state of bliss, into the state of, beginning to feel the interconnections between things and the beautiful interconnectedness of the universe and how we're all one. We're moving into that stage, and to get there, you've got to let loose some of your junk, and that's not easy to do. I'm still letting loose some of my junk even to this day. I have daddy issues that still come up and affect me sometimes. My father wasn't a real presence in my life, and he has been around more recently, and I find myself still working through some of that personality level stuff with him. So this is a lifelong process for sure, and so take advantage of it and work with this program a few times. Really try and let yourself experience those projections for what they are, and let go of them, at least for now. Graham asks, how would you say these projections differ from the mental constructs of the HUD paths? Juan says, hello, Graham, an excellent question, my brother. It is an excellent question, and they differ in many ways, but they're also exactly the same in many ways. The projections specifically relate to your hierarchical relationships with people. In other words, what you value and what you dislike. They specifically relate to your place in the world, and they're personal. Some of the ones for HUD and even for Sheen might have some of those components to them. But these are specifically related to things that keep you separate from other people. Things that allow you to feel you're better than this person, but you're worse than this person. Those are the areas that we're looking at this week, this time period. Does that make sense? Hold on a second. So, more questions? Juan asks about the path of Rash. Do you feel during the path working on Rash we can confront personal demons as it interferes? Absolutely. That's particularly fears related to the self and self-worth and self, whether you're being a good person, or whether you're being a useful person, or whether your goals are in the right direction. Those sorts of things are very natural for the path of Rash. Qoph is slightly different. It's more about how you relate to others and how you relate to the world around you. Brendine says, it seems that the projections create exactly what they are. You feel unloved, you project it, and it comes back to you. That's absolutely right. You know, and you perceive it even if it's not there. You know, I mean, how many times have you, in your lifetime, thought someone was saying something where they were being mean to you, and you eventually discussed it with them, and it turns out they weren't thinking that way at all. That was completely a projection on your part. It had nothing to do with reality. It just had to do with stuff that was going on inside of you that you put onto them. Then Brendine continues, one is then enfolded into a world of feeling unloved and cannot receive love. Correct. If you don't feel like you can be loved, there's no way to receive love. Even if someone offers you love, you assume that there's a trick involved, or you just don't even notice it. I mean, that's you know, there's negative projections where you actually, someone offers you help, and then you say, no one ever helps me. You know, you just didn't even notice that the person was trying to reach out to you. Juan says, excellent. If I may, could you suggest some form on personally calling out a fear during the pathwork of Rash? Are you saying that you have one that you specifically are aware of that you weren't able to work with for some reason? Or do you feel like there's an under the surface fear that you're not aware of that you're wanting to unearth? Well, I'm sorry, Juan said, did I read this one? Excellent, if I may, could you suggest some form of personally calling out a fear during the pathwork of Rash? And Juan says, yes, but more like a fear I would like to confront and see if I'm at peace or over with. Ah, yes, and that's actually quite useful in Rash, since there is sort of a calm quality to it, to actually bring out the fear and just, you know, approach it and see if you feel comfortable with it. Here's what I would suggest. I make mention of a number of caves and so forth. As you're wandering past one of the caves, call out to the fear and see what comes out. Now, if it comes out in a form that is hostile to you, you know, or angry, at that point you need to work with it a little bit more. If it comes out in the form of like just a small child, or even one of the lions, but it looks docile and tame, then you're probably at peace with it. Does that help you? So I'm going to show you guys a couple more images of the Path of Kof, or the tarot card related to it. This is from the Thoth Tarot, the Aleister Crowley's tarot deck. And you can see it bears some similarity to it. It's more almost energetic rather than physical. But you see the sort of watery being. In this case, it's actually a scarab beetle who's emblematic of the sun at midnight. And so you're seeing the light of the sun kind of coming up as a possibility. Once you get past these pillars and these guardians, you will eventually reach this sort of inner light state. That's kind of what's being applied there. It also has the raining yuds. And Zoltan is writing a very long thing. I'm just going to go ahead and read it aloud. He says, he just did the Path of Kof the second time today, and it was really great, really illuminating, although I know I still need to work on these issues. Thank you, Jason. I was wondering if you prefer to sit down in your asana facing the east so that your imaginary or astral temple is coinciding with your real temple or your real room. Another question, which came to my mind, is pathworking always about ascending rather than descending? I mean, for example, if I want to create something, the creation is Malkuth and the creative will is Keter, then I'd imagine a working could point downward. But then again, pathworking might mean only the ascending into Godhead thing, right? Well, there are certainly magical ways of approaching pathworking, to answer the second question first, so that we're working our way downward. And you don't need to listen to a recording to do so. But yeah, I mean, starting an idea in the highest and bringing it through the levels is certainly a powerful way of approaching it, and you can bring it through the paths as well. And you can even decide which paths and energies you want to incorporate into what you're doing. But I mean, that's going to be highly individualized, and there are a number of authors who've written a little bit about this subject, but it's not too terribly much written. But and you don't have to start necessarily in Kether. You can start in Chokhmah, you can start in Chesed, any one of those places on the left-hand pillar. You could even sort of start in Gevura. Tiferet is a possibility as well. Any of those places, you could begin the work and ultimately assume that those higher ones have already been there, and that's. But I mean, starting it in the center is probably not a bad idea, and bringing it down the central channel can be useful too. Although bringing it along the sides ones can pick up some of the energies of those things. So it's really going to be about which energies you want to incorporate into it. If you want to use pathworkings from a magical perspective, and you can, in a visionary way, go through all of these paths. I have recordings; they're very inexpensive of all the binaural sounds. So if you wanted to incorporate my sort of audio theurgy, you could just kind of listen to those in sequence if you wanted to incorporate some extra sonic technology in there. As for your first question about where to sit, I do prefer to sit facing the east in asana, but I think you can do it lying in your bed, and you don't necessarily have to be facing any particular direction. I do think that there's a usefulness to coinciding what you're physically doing with what you're doing in your astral temple as much as possible. My newer New Hermetics recordings actually incorporate a method of creating your inner temple around you in your physical space, but also astrally, rather than just going into the inner temple from an imaginal space, and I think that can be quite useful. Zoltan says, so that's more like an adept stuff, not for beginners. Well, I mean, if you're wanting to bring something down from one of the higher levels, it probably would be a good idea to have at least done the path workings up that far. I mean, I think that to an extent, anyone can approach magic at whatever level they want to, from an experimental sense, and see what happens. Certainly, I think any magical act, it's a good idea to really be clear on what it is that you're doing, so that you don't create things that you don't actually want. Because there's an old saying and a popular song from a few years ago: "Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it." There's a strong tendency for people to, when they really put their will into something magically, that they do get it. Then you have to deal with the repercussions of that, and you don't always want what you think you want. So inner work is important as a preparation, but I think ultimately it's important to also be doing things practically in the real world, and not just sort of learning things and just turning around and just teaching them to others, and having it all just be theoretical for the most part. Zoltan says, am I saying your name right, Zoltan? I'm pronouncing it. I think that there's a cartoon or something that has a character with a name spelled that way. I'm hoping I'm saying it right. Yeah, I guess I have to know the paths first, which is possible only through working my way up. Right. Juan says, we rarely want what the ego self wants. Yes, right. Although the ego self can be right. It depends on how connected you are to your sort of line of destiny, your true will, your however you want to look at it, your connection with the divine. Okay, great. I'm glad I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Zoltan. I'm sure I'm saying it with a silly American accent, though, right? So anyway, the Path of Kof is a highly important path, often sort of gone over quickly, as quickly as possible, to move on to the more interesting stuff afterwards, and the less challenging stuff afterwards, because this really takes, this is like a gut punch. Everything that everything in your life you're creating, and you're doing so by, placing value on things and ignoring other things. That's how everything in your life is based on that. That's a hard lesson to learn, and it does tend to be need to be learned, again and again as we move forward at each level. We need to remember and incorporate all the things we've learned previously, and sometimes relearn them at a new level as well. So another image of So Kevin says, so basically if we concentrate on our tarot cards corresponding with the path we are working on, it will help us in our connection. Well, yes and no. I mean, it can, or it cannot. It depends on how you use it. Certainly, it presents a colorful, imagistic way of approaching the path, and I think that's one of the great things about the connections that people have made between the tarot and the paths. But ultimately, the paths don't really have anything to do with the tarot. That has all been placed there secondarily, but I think that it creates some imagery that is useful. So I mean, if you listen to my recording, the imagery of the recording is all present in this. I mean, there is water, there are various beasts, there are towers, there is a moon. All of the imagery that's present in the tarot cards is present in the recordings, and this you can see in this one. There's also a sun rising in the background there. There's a consistency in the imagery and the path itself, but the tarot cards are they're an instructional tool more than the essence of the path, and can be used in other ways. I use them to divine for people quite frequently, and I don't say when the moon comes up, I don't say, oh, well, you're working on the ability to let loose of your projections. Instead, I turn it the other way and I say, well, this card means that there are some things that you're not necessarily seeing the forest for the trees. You're possibly, when you're wandering in the moonlight, often things look differently than they would in the daylight, and you don't always see everything that's there, and sometimes you mistake one thing for another thing. Juan says, I tend to use the cards as a gateway or door, staring into it long enough for it to feel as if I can literally step inside the image like a painting. Yeah, I mean, that's my sort of New Hermetics approach to it as well. And these pathworkings take a slightly different slant on it in that they're more directly focusing on the spiritual experience, and the specific tarot imagery is slightly, secondary to it. Zoltan from France says, about tarot cards, what about Zadie is not the star? I see you chose to use the pre-AC thinking about the crucial path card correspondence. Can you talk about that? Well, I don't know if this is really the context for that, but just, I mean, ever so briefly, there's a lot of things about that if there's a mathematical reason for the card that Crowley chose to switch with it, which is the Emperor, and he didn't actually do what's present in the Golden Dawn system, which is simply to switch the places. He switches it more fully, and the correspondences seem much stronger to me the other way around. I don't know. And Zadie is not necessarily even what's being depicted in the manuscript. If you look at it, that's sort of something that he decided, most likely because he noticed that there is this flip, and that you can do a contrary flip with those two things later. It's not something that I find to be that useful. Wow, there's a lot of stuff coming through. Devin says, thank you, Juan. I like that explanation. So the tarot is not the path, but can be used as a gate into the path. Am I correct on this assessment? Juan says, yes, and I agree. That is basically true. Now, there's another form of pathworking specific to the New Hermetics, in which basically we use the tarot card as a path, as a gateway, and then we enter the space of the tarot card specifically for finding an archetypal being that exemplifies the tarot card itself, and have an interaction with that archetype, and that is useful too. It's slightly different in its perspective and its tone, but it serves a similar function. Now, Brendusa sent us a full page of text here. Brendusa says, I started to do the Path of Kof a few days ago. Amazing things happening. A happiness and joy came up within me, showing up outside of me. Wherever I go, or do, people are noticing it and even telling me, you're always happy. The lady in the bank, Felicia, said this. At work, when I have clients come with a low energy, I help them to raise energies up and assist them with whatever I can during massage. They come in low energy, go out with a different perspective of the situation they're in. This is all capitalized, I am in a state of beautiful balance, which did not happen when I did the Path of Sheeting. I feel progressing so fast. Thank you, all of you that are at my side and be at service for me. Thank you, Jason, for these incredible recordings. Thank you, Juan, for your day-by-day mentoring aspects. And thank you, Brendine, for your incredible love, care, and assistance, for your beautiful friendship. I'm grateful to all of you. Produce it. Thank you. It's a very beautiful statement. I'm glad that you're getting so much benefit. That's wonderful. Brendine says, Juan's approach opens the door to the visual experiences then. I don't experience visually detailed as he shares it. Just curious how to do that. Zoltan says, okay. Well, Brendine, I mean, in our separate work, where you're doing things like image streaming, I've given you a few suggestions on how to work on getting a more visual aspect to things, and that is to first of all just require them and ask for them, and to describe them to yourself as they're happening, either verbally or in your own mind. The more that you expect to have visual things happen, the more they'll happen. The more that you're okay with it just being a series of feelings and so forth, the more that it's going to stay in that level. There's no absolute need for you to have crystal clear, photographically detailed sorts of images coming through. Just enough to sort of work through the experience and experience what happens, and have a few spontaneous things pop in. That's fine. You don't need to be working towards creating inner cinema at this point. The more you work with this stuff, the more frequently that happens. But it doesn't happen every time for anybody. Sometimes we approach something and we start in the right state of mind for it to happen. Juan says, personally, Jason's image streaming helps a great deal. I practiced it with the tarot images as a way to help me with meaning in them. It in turn allowed me to use that in pathworking. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that might be useful for you, Brendine, would be, it is Brendine, yeah, it's Brendine, would be to sit down with any set of images. It doesn't have to be the tarot. Something evocative and mystical, though. There's a bunch of woodcuts of like the Apocalypse or Dante's Inferno or any of those sorts of things that have sort of cool images to them, and sit down with those. Look at the images. Let the images wash over you. Notice what's most important to you in the images, and then fill in. Close your eyes and see if you can fill in the detail and get a fully three-dimensional feeling of them, and then approach them from all the sensory modalities. Touch them, smell them, feel the textures, see the colors as vividly as possible. Just really work on it, and get your inner seeing tool really as primed up as possible. Diana says, some people are just naturally more visual than others. Some people have an easier time with auditory. Brendine says, expecting to happen. Nice. I would no idea it was possible to experience such details visually. And as Diana says, some people really never experience things, or only rarely experience things as vividly. Some people have no problem if they ask for, say, the sound of musical instruments to start in their mind, like a drum. They can just instantly hear that in their mind. Other people have no inner tool for doing that, or very limited inner tools. Some people have no problems calling up a smell, or calling up the texture of velvet, or some. Each of us have inner senses that are developed to greater and greater extent. And so, what I recommend doing is using the ones that you're best at in order to lead into the ones that you're less comfortable with. And as you incorporate as many of them as possible in any experience, it becomes more and more vivid. Excuse me. So, I guess in going over these things for the next week and your other projects, I would recommend trying to expect improvement at all times. Now, personally, I think one of the best places to begin getting into a strongly visual place with these recordings is during that initial, the lead-in to the inner temple area, or whatever, the Malkuth's temple, which isn't quite the inner temple, but it's pretty closely related. That's all good. But then once you're getting into the Kabbalistic meditation, you're being called into a much more unphysical kind of visualizing. And that's an excellent time to really try and open up to have as many sort of lights and fireworks and different kinds of experiences that are just free form come into your consciousness and allow you to just charge your psychic and your physical body with energy, so that as you move into the next phase, you're really in a powerfully, magical place. So I think that I have covered what this path is about, and I'd like everyone to explore this path. And when we come together again next time, I'd like you to have explored some, and we don't have to specifically talk about them, but I'd like you to have explored some of your projections and see if you can really uncover, because we all know certain projections. Like, we all know that we will tend to place a really attractive person into a slightly higher, status role, or an extremely wealthy or powerful seeming person into a slightly higher. But there are more hidden ones that I'd like you guys to try and uncover in yourselves and work through in these recordings. Things like within our immediate family relationships, or within our love relationships, or with just the average person walking down the street. What are you projecting onto that person? So that's what I'd like you guys to focus on, if possible, and to let go of it as much as possible. It sounds like some of you already are. Juan says, a most excellent class. Thank you very much for the wonderful tips and suggestions, as well as the guidance. Well, it's my pleasure to have you all, and I really enjoy hearing from you and having you here. And I'm going to try and get this recording up and available for download as quickly as possible. Sometimes it takes several hours for it to process. Sometimes it processes very quickly, so I'll do it as quickly as I can. Some other thank yous, and thanks for the excellent class. It's always fun, and so the next time we're going to be talking about the Path of Sadi, as Zoltan brought up, and I think, Zoltan, when we have that class, I think we can talk a little bit more about the Emperor versus Sadi there if you want to. Although a lot of people who are present here are not Book of the Law people, so it's not going to be that meaningful for them. But we can talk about it briefly. So some more stuff. Brendan says, I find that when the projections are out of the way, it seems much more magical day to day, open to see different. Juan says, thank you all for showing up and sharing your thoughts as well with each of us. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Zoltan says, thank you. It's really cool to see you live after reading your books. Oh, it's my pleasure. Brendusa says, I am working a project, the image of finding my God within more than projecting stuff on others. Thank you for this incredible class, Jason. Graham says, another great class. Thanks. Thank you, guys. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.